Welcome to Impact Point, where we cut through the chase and get to the facts. My name is Nilama Grover, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm really excited about today's topic as it is really relevant in today's world. And the topic is how to prepare security for counter UAS. Recent incidents in El Paso and Fort Hancock are stark warnings of the importance of coordinated decision making at speed. Today's drone threat isn't waiting for the next breakthrough technology. It's evolving in real time using cheap hardware, open source software, and constant field experimentation. And the hard truth is that the biggest vulnerability isn't sensors or interceptors. It's how coordination occurs when decisions need to be made under pressure. My guest today has spent his career operating at exactly that intersection of pace, experimentation, and human decision making. Brad Halsey is the founder of Building Momentum, a former Navy surface warfare officer, and a nationally recognized leader in teaching teams how to solve problems in high stress, fast moving environments. Brad has worked with defense, homeland security, and innovation communities to help organizations adapt faster than the threats they face, from war zones overseas to complex domestic security challenges. And so there's no one better than Brad to deal with this really important issue and tell us where we are today and how do we get better prepared to deal with counter UAS defense and security. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is awesome. And what a great topic, too. It actually turns out drones are on nobody's radar because they can't detect them. So, well said.
It's
Nice
true.
pun. I mean, so I spent the earlier part of my career, I was in the Navy. I spent time as a special operations officer and surface warfare officer. I spent time in the Middle East. But then, I got injured, got processed out, and I went to a think tank at Stanford Research Institute and spent almost a decade making, all sorts of different technologies at a place where we had the smartest brains, in the world. And what I found was a lot of that technology wasn't percolating to the places it needed to go to. And it was kind of like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, like every project would be whisked away to the warehouse at the end. And we did some pretty impactful things. It just was really frustrating that it wasn't getting to where it needed to be. And so in 2008, I decided to go to Iraq and as like the Army's, embedded geek and figure it out. So I spent about a year there just as a scientist running around solving problems in a lab that I had in Baghdad, but just ran all across the country, tried to understand what the heck was going on. Like why are we still kicking boxes and shooting at IEDs when, all this technology was being invented back at home? Learned a lot of stuff about, why that happens. And when I came back, the Army really wanted more of that offering. So I ended up starting a program where I train nerds to go to war. But what I quickly realized is just because you're number one in your class at MIT or you have a PhD from Caltech, it does not mean that you're worth a shit when you're, on the ground when bullets are flying, or you don't have your stuff with you. You don't have your lab and you don't have your equipment. Can you actually make something impactful in a short amount of time under that stress? So I had to develop a program to weed those nerds out. It was a week-long sort of hell week of building stuff and, stressing them out. And did that for a bunch of years and really enjoyed not only doing the work in the field, but actually showing people how to become kind of like that MacGyver of the 21st century. So I started Building Momentum in 2014 and have trained something on the order of like 10,000 people in doing the MacGyver-y kind of thing with the technology that you have at hand. Sometimes it's high tech, sometimes it's low tech. But that's been sort of one of the two big things we do here. And the other one is we solve really hard problems. Sometimes they're global in size. We work with different countries. We work with different organizations. Sometimes it's really hard problems, like how do I, grow an organic drone program in my country where we don't have any drones. And we're doing that actually for a couple of countries, all the way down to like, how do I make a submersible or how do I make a boat that goes, autonomously out into the ocean and does a thing. So I'll stop talking for a minute because I think that threw a lot at you there.
Well, that's fascinating, and I think so true. Which is why we're a big believer, and I'm a big believer in experiential learning, and I know that's a big focus of Building Momentum. One of my favorite quotes that I've seen from you is the pacing threat is the threat of pace. I'd like you to sort of shed some light on this quote from the UAS perspective right now. In the UAS context, what does this mean?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for that quote, because it was actually we actually trained DAU, Defense Acquisition University, in how to maneuver fast. And I can't think of an organization sort of more antithetical to what we do than the contracting and acquisition world of the U.S. government. But to their credit, we have been working with them for years to help sort of guide cultural change there. And Dr. Alan Easterling was the one that actually said that as we were arguing it, not arguing, we were, smashing our heads together on what actually is important for these contracting officers to learn. And he coined that phrase, but it's exactly right. I mean, there is no DARPA Hard anymore. There's only DARPA Fast. There is no hard tech anymore. It is only about the speed at which things are moving. And the IED threat of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars is multiply that by 1,000, and that is the drone threat right now. And it is just moving at the speed of light. And so anyone that is like working on a 2-year plan to build something that will take down quadcopters, you've already missed it. Like in 2 years, everything's going to be over. We're going to be in some other domain. We talk about this internally sometimes. Like, what if Ukraine was the jungle? Would we even be thinking about drones? Like, you can't fly them in jungles. You can barely see anything from the canopy. Like, would you ever see a fiber optic guided drone if Ukraine was in the jungle? Maybe not, because no one would have solved for that. They would have solved for robotics that can work in the jungle. Like, it'd be a whole different thing. And so, in 2 years from now, who knows what the world's going to be doing? But I do know that speed is the only way that we can keep up with what these evolutions are showing us.
That's so true. So, in your opinion, what does true agility look like in the UAS or the counter UAS world, or organizationally, not just technically?
I think you have to really look at it on the business side from what is your business case. It is getting increasingly hard for companies to make money in this field. And there's a reason for that. There's an adoption race. So every company making a component for a drone, a motor, flight controller, they win by adoption. So if you can make it simple, you can make the interface easy to use, you can make it cheap, people will start buying that. And so in this race to getting your components adopted, there's something else that is going on, sort of behind the scenes that no one's really talking that much about, which is AI is now able to, glue all those components together in a way that makes sense. And so you're seeing this in all areas of technology where, we just did it here the other day. We built a robot completely based on AI prompts, and it has end effectors and it works remotely and everything. And so we had one team code it like we would normally do, and we had another team build it just through prompts on AI. And we got to the same answer. So what that tells me is there's a growing divide between buying components and just moving at the speed of light using AI to glue those components together in some type of firmware GUI, OS overlay. And then companies that are trying to sell drones as a business model where they've invested some time into that coding and that architecture to make the human factor side much more amenable to flight and all those things, that divide is growing rapidly. And so what that really means is you're accelerating tech even faster to people that maybe haven't ever used it. And that is a awesome and scary thing, right? Think about a country that has never had the infrastructure, the money, the knowledge to build a drone. Now, in very short order, they will, right? And so if you look at that, what will some of these countries that have never done this come up with? What will Bangladesh drones look like, or Antarctica drone? Maybe that's not, but high altitude drones like in the Andes or in the it's like it's going to be driven in a way that's even faster than it is right now.
Yeah. So the question, so when you're doing counter UAS, what do you need to do in your organization so you're agile to deal with the rapid pace at which things are evolving?
I love that I didn't answer the question. That's my fault. So
No.
in the organization, I just think you can't. I think you can't build a company for one solution. You need to really think through the business case of the company and how you're going to address these issues from an agility of thought and an agility of finance. So the way we're doing it is, we're not a product company. We develop a ton of intellectual property, so other people can run down and make that if they want. But what we really care about is solving the problem right now, because the next one's going to pop up in a few minutes. And so with counter drone, like any drone organization company should be also working just as hard on the counter drone problem. And that just requires some really clever thinking. Like, it's a really hard problem. If you just try to jam, that's not going to work. If you just try kinetics, that's not going to only work. Like, it's a IED problem times 1,000. It's going to be solved by 1,000 different ways. And all you're going to do is sort of push the technology into different domains that might be easier to address, but you probably will not destroy the threat, anytime soon, because then you can move to ground robots, underwater robots. I mean, you think about a drone that's flying, we spend a lot of effort trying to make it fly. Like, flying is not the easiest thing to do. And so you would think it'd be really vulnerable, right? Making it not fly is actually a lot easier than making something not roll. Um,
Mhm.
and yet it's an extremely hard problem because of the speed at which these things are moving. I mean, we're seeing this right now in Iran, where all of our defenses are built to hit high-speed missiles, but a slow-moving, low-moving drone, really hard to detect. Really hard. Our radars and some of our tech aren't looking at that type of stuff. We're looking at things moving at Mach 2.
Yes, exactly. And so the question also is, what should the government be doing if you were advising the government as they're trying to, prepare for security and, develop defense measures? What should they be doing? What advice do you have for the government in terms of organizationally, how should they deal with this very rapidly evolving threat that is changing constantly? What should they be doing organizationally?
Yeah, I would probably address that in two ways: inward facing and outward facing. So ever since we've been teaching drones and drone building and and counter drones technologies since 2018. In fact, I got some videos online where we're at Camp Buring that just got actually hit the other day by Iranian missiles. We were at Camp Buring shooting drones down with T-shirt cannons and crossbows and shotguns and you name it. And so the reason we're so far behind internally is that the government made it very restrictive to fly drones. It was extremely hard for a warfighter to get onto a U.S. range and fly a piece of plastic around. It was extremely hard. It still is extremely hard
Mhm.
because they didn't know how to categorize and protect that asset and things like that. And the NDA of 2020 made this a nightmare too, is they just shut it all down. And so when internally you're not getting reps flying these things, you're not getting reps shooting these things down from a troop standpoint, you've completely stalled out any innovation there. So that was inward facing. What they need to do is they need to just open the floodgates, let U.S. ranges be safe spaces for warfighters to go play. Like, give them budget, give them things they can go buy and use, and gamify it and reward risk taking in that space. And it's again, it's antithetical to the way the government usually runs, and it's actually the military runs, and it's sort of like in the ethos to do such a thing in war, right? In war, we give a lot of latitude to our warfighters to solve problems on the ground, but at home in garrison, it's ridiculously restrictive, and it actually should be flipped. You should have a higher risk tolerance when you're not at war, allowing people to push into areas that, yes, they might break some stuff, and okay, who cares? But allow that risk tolerance to be higher. So inward thinking needs to change culturally, like out of the gate, and people should be on ranges every single day flying drones, and then have a red team knocking them down. Like, every single day we should be doing that. Like, just like rifle shooting. Like, why are we shooting snipers, sniper weapons anymore? You can just send a drone over there and take the one guy out that you care about. On the flip side, on the external facing, the government should really be looking at small businesses. I mean, you're not going to get agile, interesting, fast-moving solutions out of the big five. You just aren't. They're not set up that way. They're building aircraft carriers and F-35s, which will be obsoleted, really soon. I can't think of a good reason to ever have a human in an aircraft in the future. I can't think of a reason to have a human in a tank, or even a tank for that matter. I can't even imagine having aircraft carriers, because why can't you just do that with drones anyway, and then you don't need an aircraft carrier? So the big guys can't do that. So I think the government really needs to. I mean, they're trying to do this through the SBIR process and the STTR process, but just really seeding small business with easy to get money that are, and allow them to be risk tolerant.
I love that answer, Brad. So true. I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic, which is something that, has been in the news lately. El Paso has happened, Fort Hancock happened recently, and they basically, I believe, were warnings of a real issue, which is the lack of a coordinated response across overlapping authorities and the lack of a common operating picture. And since you and your teams have done so much work in the field, I'd like to get your perspective on when incidents happen fast. What specifically breaks down first? Is it situational awareness? Is it authority clarity? Or is it communication latency? What are the big things that emerge? And my second part of that questions are why do these themes only show up in the moment despite existing tabletop exercises and after action reviews and all the training that currently exists?
Yeah, it's kind of related to what I said just a minute ago, is that we actually don't practice this nearly as much as we need to. And there's no, like, for instance, firefighting. I did firefighting training all the time. I went through the big simulators and wore all the gear, and we, if a fire breaks out on a boat, we know exactly what to do. Same thing with all the underwater scuba stuff I did. Your regulator fails, something comes off. What do you do when this happens? What if you have shallow water blackout? What do you do? We practice this stuff, and there's sort of a rubric to follow when that happens, especially like in firefighting. There's a rubric. There's a way to communicate. We do this in general quarters in the Navy. Like, there's a way to communicate when things are going south. But with the drone experience, the drone evolution, we don't practice it enough. We don't. It is exceptionally hard for me to go fly a drone in any covered airspace, right? I have to send all these waivers in. They have to, I have to get approved from the FAA. But those are the places that, because we can't fly drones there, those are the places where we don't practice. We can practice in a field, like, go out to anywhere, remote, and you can, like, oh, there's a drone, and then who do you call? But it doesn't, when you have it on an airbase or an airport, it's like you haven't been practicing it because you disallowed drones to fly there. So then when you first see a drone, you haven't been practicing it. You're not sure what the hell's going on. You're like, is that really happening? Is that a thing? Is that really a drone? I wasn't on radar. You're just using your binoculars. Like, what the hell's happening? So that's the thing. Like, we have impeded ourselves, and this is one of my big soapboxes, is in general, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. The government, especially the military, but across all of the government, we don't train how we fight, because that is going to be how we will fight. It's going to be all this asymmetric crazy shit that, like, we don't want to do right now because it's risk taking. We're flying drones over airports, but that is going to be what will happen when you have democratization of this technology to everyone on the planet. Countries aren't going to be investing in missiles anymore. They're going to be investing in thousands of cheap little drones that you can't see on a radar until it's too late. And that's what they're going to do. And so it's just that divide of training, not how we fight, that is killing us in those situations.
Yeah, which is, really critical given how quickly everything is evolving and how important this is becoming in pretty much every aspect of security and defense, and even in our day-to-day lives, frankly. So the lack of a place to really practice and rehearse and build that competency is a huge challenge. But I also wonder, given how drones are quickly evolving, how could you even physically do that with just practicing in open space? Because it's just too many things that are things are changing too quickly, which then leads me to believe that perhaps there needs to be a platform for rehearsing decisions, and practice the evolving technology for drones. What do you think about that, and how would that be? Will that, because I'm also thinking that existing tabletop exercises don't do the job. So I'd like your perspective on that.
I guess at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, what are you really trying to protect? So let's run that scenario out a little bit. So you're in an airport, and here comes a small drone. And so what can you do? And let's stop the scenario and start inventing tech, which is what we're really, as a country, we're really good at. We're going to go spend, $500 million and figure out a way to stop that 8-inch quadcopter. But what are you really worried about? Because let's say you build this amazing counter intercept system that can detect it and shoot it down. The next day someone wants to do harm, they're just going to figure out a way around that. And it's going to be this cat and mouse game that you will always lose. What you're probably most worried about is one of those drones hitting a airplane with human beings in it, taking off. So maybe there's a way, maybe we start thinking about that problem. Can aircraft themselves, insulate themselves on takeoff and landing where it's going to be most critical? Or can you set up new ways for aircraft and new corridors for aircraft to take off and land that you protect with certain technologies, and then you don't worry about the rest, because you got to really there is no silver bullet. You're not going to be able to cover the entire airport with a dome of no drones. And so I think you got to start peeling the problem back a little bit and say, where are you trying to protect? Same with any venue. If you're going to try to hit a stadium, if you're going to try to, protect a school, it's like, sometimes your countermeasures, like a good example is this. I keep seeing this in Ukraine where they're using helicopters and machine guns to shoot drones out of the sky. But Ukraine looks like Indiana. Like there's tons of pasture land and land where there aren't people. You can't do that over a crowded airspace. You can't be like peppering, the city with bullets while you're trying to knock something down. You'll end up killing more people than it's worth. So I think that in those situations, you need a team that will look at how your unique vulnerabilities can be handled, and then you just play the cat and mouse game. Like you have to be in that loop.
Exactly. And the incidents in El Paso and Fort Hancock were very revealing that it was really a lack of coordination across multiple authorities that led to the challenges and the issues in counter-UAS. I mean, the various entities were not coordinated with each other. And so, you know, my question therefore is, existing tabletop exercises don't allow you to rehearse the coordination piece. Okay, flying drones physically may help with some of that, but I'm not sure if it's going to do enough of that. And so this leads me to believe that there needs to be some sort of a decision rehearsal platform for different authorities to practice with each other when there is a drone or a threat that appears, to ensure that they develop the muscle memory to be able to deal with that threat and any other threat that could emerge, so that they understand how to engage with each other effectively and don't reduce the possibility of human error and lack of coordination, which is a wide open space right now.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I would even go one step further and say, if there was a platform that could do something like that, it would be great to pull data from all the other potential sources. So we're seeing this in Iran right now, right? Like Telegram is a source people are using. Signal is a source. WhatsApp is a source, and then the news agencies, they have people on the ground there. Some of the stuff is real, some of the stuff is not real. If I could just ingest, all of this information in real time, which some people are doing. They're trying really hard to like crawl this stuff, and then over time, which it doesn't have to be a long time, it can be minutes or moments, is that you start assigning confidence factors through correlation of that data. Now what you start to see is percolating to the top of this like quagmire of information. You're starting to get truth. You're starting to really see what, if 5 organizations said this happened but one said this other thing happened, your confidence factor for that other thing is low. And so not only is it practicing with your folks with, hey, we just got a drone over our airport, check, watch out for your drone, your airport, how do we deconflict this thing? Can we jam it? No, you can't jam it because you're going to knock all the instruments out of this aircraft that's taking off right now. Like there's all that sort of intra coordination, but the inter coordination, or the extra coordination is also through just all the information. Like, what do people do when they see a drone? Like, what are they supposed to do? Is there a website they log that into? Do they text somebody? Do they call their superior? Do they call traffic control? Do they call the military? So the answer is I've never been a big fan of one modality of solving that problem, because then someone's going to mess with that, right? If you're like every time you have to text on signal to this thing, someone's going to get into that loop and screw that up. But if you have a gamified way of pulling all these pieces of information in and then making the people do the best they can with that information, that would be really useful.
Yeah, that's a real missing piece right now. Now, the U.S. government does a lot of tabletop exercises for training. And my question, based on your experience training in high stress environments and thinking about the counter UAS world, what do tabletop exercises systematically fail to replicate in UAS and incidents?
You know, I haven't played a lot of tabletop, done much of those exercises. But I think that I think this could not be true. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think they assume a certain fidelity of sort of competence in the technology and a certain fidelity of competence in the communications. Um, and just, I think all of that is on the table when it comes to sort of hijacking that architecture. And so it's just, for instance, with software-defined radios, like that world is exploding right now. Has been for a couple of years. But before that, it was an arcane piece of equipment that took PhDs how to use. Once everyone knows how to use those things, which will be very soon, and someone's going to write some super simple AI algorithm to allow everyone to use these and to hook them up to stuff. Now all your comms may not be true. Everything might get spoofed. You might have misinformation coming in as information. And I wonder how accurate those tabletop exercises take into account the truly clever red teaming that's going to start happening with, good guys and bad guys, or what, there are no bad guys, as I always say. There are only good guys with different perspectives. And so, what does that look like over time? I don't know if those gains can be modified enough or quickly enough to accommodate this cat and mouse game.
Yeah. Also, I'm wondering, I like your perspective on when you're in a high tempo environment, a threat appears and you don't have hours to really decide what to do. It literally could be minutes or seconds, frankly. And so in those high tempo environments, you're going to see certain behaviors emerge. And so, given again, the fact that when you're dealing with counter UAS, it's often high threat, low time, lots of behaviors that have to be managed and trained, coordination across multiple authorities, and rapidly evolving and changing landscape. The kind of training that's needed to be able to deal with security and counter UAS has to be fundamentally changed. It can't be the same sort of exercises that have been happening so far, which is why I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we think about the counter UAS world. So I'd like you to comment on that. You've already said some of that. Let's fundamentally do the stuff in the inside. But I think rehearsal and trying to make these as real as possible, and finding the red teaming with evolving technologies. That to me seems to be ways in which we should be thinking about this, but I'd love to get your perspective on if you're doing any of that, and how do your reaction to that?
Yeah, we talk about this sometimes with the teams that we train, and innovation is really great when you're in a boardroom or you're in a whiteboard space or you're riffing with your buds. But what happens is when shit gets real, humans default to the lowest energy state of what they know. They know that I've done this 5 different times and this has worked. And even though the threat is something I've never seen before, I'm going to do this a 6th time because the 5 times worked. it is something you have to fight really hard, especially when you're scared and when you're tired and you're dehydrated, or you just don't know what to do and there is no SOP or TTP for what is about to happen. You default to what you know. And unfortunately, that is not the way through this problem. We need organizations to, think very differently about how to solve some of these issues. And maybe you can't. And maybe there's a point where you just deal. Um, but drones are cheap. Counter drone technologies can be cheap. To get out of that lowest energy state model, everybody. This is not relegated to the military. I would like to see, civil service, firefighters, police, everyone, practice doing this. Like, take a day every week and attack a building and counter it, and incentivize people to take risks. And who cares if you smash a drone into a window? Now, if you smash a $30,000 drone into a window, my question would be, why did you spend $30,000 on a drone? Like, and it comes back to that first problem that we talked about. It's really hard for companies to make money, so they have to charge a lot of money for all these features you'll never use, like all this autonomy and things like that. And all you really wanted to do is just go in, look at a window. So I think there's that divergence that needs to be addressed in the market space, which really comes down to people doing this themselves, sort of like hot rodding their cars and things like that. People have done themselves. So once you start developing that type of culture where your civil servants, your warfighters, they're going out and practicing once a week and you're going to see that comfort level increase. You're going to see them not reach for the lowest energy state every single time something goes wrong, and they're going to start thinking through the problem. But it's also going to really push the science. And I'd be grabbing, ARL and NRL and DARPA folks and throwing them into these mixtures of warfighters doing this every Friday. Just to see the evolution of how that's going to go down. But that's the reality. Here's the reality, and I'm going to piss a lot of people off by saying this maybe, but like this day and age, DARPA, NASA, ARL, those are not the cutting edge technology leaders. They were in the 50s, 60s maybe, 70s maybe, no longer. And so unless the government tries to catch up to industry by throwing their best and brightest at that problem, they are always going to be way, way behind, and that divide is getting faster and faster.
Yeah. I would argue, though, Brad, that at some point it's going to be impossible to do it physically because it's just too many variations and too many things that can happen in the real world, and we don't even know. I mean, we don't even know what's waiting for us around the corner because stuff is changing so quickly. So I would argue the only real way to do it is through online, rehearsal, simulation, and bringing the multiple authorities in the room, or through some online coordination rehearsal platform to really think about all the unplanned and planned scenarios and really build the muscle memory. I would argue it's the only way of doing it. Your reaction to that?
I would say it's not the only way to do it. I say it would be the most efficient way to do it, though, because humans need reps. That's just it. Humans need reps, and it's like every time we do a team building training, or we take an organizational cultural shift training or something like that. I always end with, you got to do this all the time. You have to do this all the time to get change. And the nice thing about what you just suggested is that's something you can do all the time. It takes a very low lift as far as logistics and preparation to run a scenario, run a simulation. And the nice thing about that is you can always do it in a wide variety of environments. So, hey, guess what? It's midnight and we're all super tired and we all, or whatever, at a base. Let's run it. What happens when you're tired? And so you can collect so much more data that way too. I'm always a big fan of, real things, like real stuff crashing into things and hearing the drone and how does that make you feel? But if you want the reps that are inculcated in that physical domain, you need a platform that will keep pushing on that. Because it eventually would get prohibitively expensive to like run out every Friday and crash 100 drones and then counter them with 100 things. Like, well, not prohibitively expensive, but I think you would end up getting sort of a fatigue because I think people's creativity would plateau if they didn't have another way to look at that problem constantly. And I think a simulation allows you to just like throw crazy shit in there. Like, what happens if I have goats on the field? Like, you can simulate that, and it turns out nothing changes. But
Yeah.
but that was an interesting thought, and thank you for putting goats in the field.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about something that's coming up very soon, which is the World Cup. Um, and it's only a few months away now. And we have multiple cities that are preparing for the FIFA World Cup. And so if you were sitting in their shoes and you had, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, you have all these authorities that are, managing the security. Um, what kind of things would you be really accelerating in terms of training to ensure that uh, we can deal with the glitches? Would what kind of this integration and coordination, which is to me a real warning sign of where there's could be big problems. But I'd put yourself in that shoes, and what would you be focused on at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like everything that building momentum does. We would start with what is the actual problem. Given the conflict in the Middle East, we're starting to see sort of individual actors act out in that sort of environment or with that sort of impetus to bring harm to Americans. Just anyway. But I would try to talk to them and say, well, what do you think the problems are? And they would say it's maybe you know vehicles running into the place, a sniper, blah 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 blah. And how many of those things have you trained against? That one, we know what, we have a sort of SOP if there's a sniper, if someone comes in with a gun. Great. Like, you'll refresher and put that aside. So now let's think about all the other things. What if someone rolls up with a pickup truck and launches 5 drones out of the back and 2 of them have something weird on it and 3 of them don't? What do you do? What do you do? I would love to start asking those questions, like, because it's not immediately obvious. Like, this is something you and I have talked about, but it's like, if the drone has a grenade on it and it flies into the stadium, are you going to try to shoot it out of the sky? Like, you risk, for one, he's probably moving too fast and you're probably not ready and you probably never saw it in the first place. But then does your security guard start shooting at it? Well, you're going to end up hitting a lot of people in the crowd. And that grenade, by the way, may not actually detonate. It may detonate and only hurt 3 people. They may be wanting to take out the TV, like, you don't know. So you have to really run that 1,000 times. And that's where I'd focus my training on all the asymmetric stuff. Like, I think about that all the time. Like, I could just roll the window down in my car and fly a drone out into the, ticket office and, do nothing. Maybe have it pop confetti and make people think about what to do next. Like, that's a really hard problem. And so it's the things that you aren't working on that I would be training on hard right now. Because everyone probably has an SOP for, like, oh, there's a sniper threat on the top of that building. It shot somebody in the crowd. What do you do? That we probably have practiced that.
So I'm glad you said that. Plan for the unplanned, okay? Because that's what you're not ready for. And again, I come back to the 2 incidents, which have happened recently in the last month, which show that there is a lack of coordination across authorities. Okay, and now you're going to be in a high stress situation with the World Cups, and you have these handoffs that need to happen in real time, and they fail. So, so to me, that is writing on the wall. It's it just happened, okay, and now you have the World Cup. So if that's to me, that seems to be a logical place to really drill down and focus. You have 3 months, and how do you really make sure that you can create that clarity for handoffs, the coordination, and do it in a way that you're ready for it, because we know right now that that is not happening. And so do you agree with me there?
Well, and again, the best way to do this, I think, is to play it out a little bit. So what happens if a drone flies over a stadium? Who takes action? Do you take any action? Everyone needs to be on, like, all on the same page about the fluid communications. So, like, let's say that the people on the ground think it's a good idea to lock the doors to prevent potential other terrorists or something from running in with guns. Well, now the people inside the stadium who are working security there might see panic ensue, and you might get a trampling event, at the exits. Or the other way around, like maybe you just allow the drone to continue its course because it might kill 5 people in the stands. But everyone exiting all at the same time in a panic mess, even out the door, might create a choke point where another drone could hit and kill even more people. And there's so many pieces of that puzzle, especially in a FIFA event with different responsibilities, but they impact the overall safety of everyone involved. And so that is, yes, to your exact point, like I would be practicing all of those things. Everyone has a role to play, but the confidence factor of their decision is not only up to what they see. There are things that are outside of what they can see. And, and you might have to make some really hard decisions. Like maybe you do let the drone impact the crowd, because what else can you do? Like, and is that, and the only way to really do that is you simulate it. You run it 1,000 times. You have everyone making decisions. They understand the gravity of their decision. They understand that they didn't see the whole picture and they still had to make a decision based on the data they had. Well, maybe you could have called these people and gotten more data and made a better decision. All of that needs to be practiced. And that's a hard thing. Like everyone's on different comms and different walkies and everyone has different responsibilities. But you can kill a lot of people inadvertently if you make the wrong decision based on limited data.
Yeah. So what, if you were to advise DHS and senior leaders listening to your podcast, what advice would you give them as the World Cup gets closer and we're preparing for other major events?
Exactly what we're talking about. I would have these hard discussions. I would try to find a way to simulate all of this flow, all these comms. I would try really hard to, retain us to allow us to do that, because that's what you and I do. We're really good at this stuff, and run this a bunch of times and really think through like what would the threat be trying to achieve. And that's another thing I think a lot about is like, a threat is trying to, usually in these situations, a threat is trying to achieve max terror, and maybe not max casualty. And so how does that apply to the drone threat? How can you get ahead of that? Can you stretch a net over the entire stadium and call it a day and take that, at least take that threat off the table and start thinking of different ways? Because if you can do that, now you're worried more about like choke points and other ingress points or other things that, that net may have mitigated, maybe not eliminated, but mitigated and pushed your training to another space. Again, a good piece of software, a simulator, would allow you to sort of make decisions on that. So you spend $20,000 and pull a giant fishing net over the stadium. What do you do next? What's your next biggest threat? It'd be nice to, ingest that information and go, okay, the simulator says based on the movement, it will be, the concessions or something.
So what keeps you optimistic that the institutions can adapt at the pace of threat that this demands?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm super optimistic. Yeah, I think it's going to come with pain. And I think that eventually people are going to wake up and realize that industry is so far ahead, or other countries. So the optimism I am having is with other countries that we are working with that don't have anything right now, but are looking at Ukraine, or looking at, what we're doing and saying, how do I be more like Ukraine actually? And what do I need to invest in to do that? And a lot of that, honestly, at the end of the day, is just education and sort of confidence to do it. Like to go smash a $3,000 drone into the ground and be like, peace. So what? And then go grab another one. That is the way you move forward in this space. And stimulating, like we talked about, a lot of these scenarios. And I don't think America's trying in little pockets. We have failed in a lot of ways. That, like the replicator program, I think, tried to attack it in a way that didn't inculcate this like pivoting ethos that, this dynamic ethos that needs to be in that space. But yeah, I'm not sure I'm super optimistic domestically. until we realize that it's really about the learning and the pivoting that matters and not about the making the money. And that's the hard thing. Companies need to make 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 of a thing to make money. It's just really hard when it's moving so fast that you built something for 5 years ago. And anyway, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have a great answer to that question. I think capitalism in this case is really hurting our ability to be agile because it demands that people make money, shareholders get, dividends, things like that.
But you raise a very important point here, Brad, that counter-UAS is not a technological race; it's an adaptation race. So, and that's what we need to do. So, I'd like to close this podcast with 3 takeaways for our audiences. I think you've given us a wealth of knowledge and things to think about. And frankly, I have, I am a little worried right now after talking to you. But that's a starting point to really try and do something about it for me. But what would your 3 takeaways be for our audiences?
It depends on who's listening. If there are leaders of the government listening, I would say, you talk about doing innovative things and trying new things, but then when you have to get your budget spent and you're coming down to the end of the quarter or the end of the fiscal year, you tend to grab to the lowest energy state things again. You buy more of a thing that you've bought in the past. And I would encourage, at least in the government, like really try to push hard on the things that make you uncomfortable. Like allow your warfighters or your staff or whatever to go out and break stuff. Realize that hardware is cheap, but learning is expensive, or learning is hard, I guess. And so you could break $300,000 worth of drones and learn, a decade worth of information that would have cost you billions of dollars in just, doing it organically. So, so that if the audience is the government, I would just we need to shift really hard right now. And it comes down to very simple, basic things. Like, I like what you said about counter drone. It is not going to be a single tech, or it's just going to be this, the speed of adaptation is going to be the shield. That's all you got. If it's industry, I know there's a lot of venture capital insight going, or excitement around some of these larger companies that are trying to do larger things. There's also venture capital excitement around the smaller stuff. Again, I think of the jungles. I think of Myanmar and things that are going on over there. Things will look very different in that space. You would invent really interesting new investable tech if you tried to solve a robotics problem in the jungle. It would look very different than the robotics problem of Ukraine or Indiana, for that matter. It looks exactly like that. And so I would ask venture capital, don't chase the big monies, chase the big ideas in that space. There's some really or big opportunities in those spaces. Because technology is moving so rapidly, you can create a bunch of new IP in areas that we haven't done before, just because the iterative cycle is so fast. And then I guess for everybody, the next domain here is space. Space is one of these areas that is going to feel that accelerant even more so than any of this stuff. And getting and looking at how we're going to accelerate drones basically into space, which are like LEO satellites, is very interesting to me. I think it's going to catch everyone off guard, and I would expect that every country in the world will have a LEO space program in 10 years from now. So, I think those are,
Wow.
that last one was a little bit orthogonal to what we were talking about, but it just popped into my head as something that I evangelize.
Amazing takeaways. Thank you so much, Brad. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and really a wealth of knowledge. Please listen in and tag us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you, our audience. And thank you very much, Brad. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks. And I would love to hear people argue with me. So if you think I'm wrong, yeah, I want to hear it.
Awesome.